On May 31st, 1922, an English lawyer named Herbert Armstrong becomes the only lawyer in the history of England to be hanged. He's hanged for the crime of murdering his wife. To his last breath, he will claim he's innocent. Was he? And if he wasn't innocent, why do legal experts then and today feel that he was wrongly convicted? In this video, we'll look at the facts of the Herbert Armstrong case to find the answers to those questions. To all appearances, Herbert Armstrong was a prosperous lawyer with impeccable social standing and well-liked in his community, a small town called Hay, 20 miles west of Hereford, England. In the spring of 1919, Armstrong's wife becomes ill. Her doctor, Thomas Hinks, notes her symptoms: pain and weakness on one side of the body, followed by loss of muscle control and paralysis on the affected side. Kitty Armstrong recovers from her illness, but in August of the following year, she has the same symptoms, accompanied by heart murmurs and partial paralysis in her hands and feet. She's unable to keep her food down, and she begins hallucinating. She also begins to suffer from severe depression. Her husband appears caring and concerned. The couple has been married for 15 years. As Kitty's illness progresses, Mr. Armstrong keeps in touch with his wife's doctor and shares his worries about her health with his relatives and friends. Kitty continues hallucinating, and Dr. Hinks eventually comes to the conclusion that she's having a mental breakdown. He has her admitted to Barnwood, an upscale private mental asylum located in the nearby town of Gloucester. At Barnwood, her health improves, and in late January she's discharged from care. But soon after she returns home, her health again deteriorates, and her physical symptoms return with a vengeance. On February 22, 1921, almost exactly a month to the day after her return from Barnwood, Kitty Armstrong dies. Her death certificate indicates that she died of gastritis, inflammation of the stomach, made worse by heart and kidney disease. The funeral is duly held, Kitty Armstrong is buried, and to friends and acquaintances, it just seems a tragically premature death. No one suspects her husband, Herbert Armstrong, of any wrongdoing. However, 8 months later, Armstrong persuades a man called Oswald Martin to come to his home for tea. Oswald Martin is the only other lawyer in the town of Hay, where Armstrong practices law. Martin has opened the law office across the street from Armstrong's and now competes with him for business. Martin thinks the reason Armstrong is badgering him to visit is to discuss a case that both of them are representing from opposite sides. On October 26, 1921, Martin finally accepts Armstrong's invitation to tea at his home, a property called Mayfield. But instead of discussing legal matters, Armstrong just offers up small talk and insists Martin have one of the scones he set out on the table. To make sure Martin has a scone, Armstrong personally places one on Martin's plate. Martin eats the scone, and when he returns home, he becomes violently ill. The doctor who treats Martin is the same doctor who treated Kitty Armstrong, Dr. Hinks, and he recognizes that Martin's symptoms are strikingly similar to Kitty Armstrong's. When he confers with the local pharmacist, John Davies, and finds out that Herbert Armstrong brought a large quantity of arsenic recently, Dr. Hinks contacts the authorities. Oswald Martin's urine is tested and arsenic is found. Scotland Yard is alerted and quietly gathers evidence from Martin, Dr. Hinks, and John Davies. As a result of what they find, Armstrong is arrested on December 31, 1921, for the attempted murder of Oswald Martin. The arresting officers find arsenic in his home and a packet of arsenic in his pocket. His wife's body is exhumed and found to be riddled with arsenic. In January 1922, Armstrong is charged with his wife's murder. 3 months later, his trial is held. But the prosecutor has a problem. Armstrong insists on his innocence. He hires a top defense attorney, Henry Curtis Bennett, who begins to build a case that Kitty Armstrong was depressed and committed suicide. As for Armstrong's alleged attempt on the life of Oswald Martin, while Armstrong had a large quantity of arsenic in his possession when he was arrested, no conclusive evidence remains to prove that the arsenic in Martin's system came from the food he ate at Armstrong's home. All of the evidence against Armstrong is circumstantial, and in the eyes of the law, circumstantial evidence isn't enough to ensure conviction. Armstrong has many allies in the town of Hay, and the fact that it was Oswald Martin, Armstrong's business rival, who precipitated the charges against Armstrong, looks suspicious to them. Some people even murmur that Armstrong is being framed. Armstrong's defense attorney argues that Kitty Armstrong's medical records show she'd been depressed, and her nurses can testify she had articulated thoughts of suicide. She'd even asked a nurse whether a fall from a second-floor window of her home would be enough to kill her. However, her last nurse reports her dying words were, "I'm not going to die, am I? I have so much to live for, my husband and my children." Another major problem for Armstrong's defense attorney is that Dr. Bernard Spilsbury, one of the UK's leading forensic specialists, testifies that the fatal dose of arsenic that killed Mrs. Armstrong had to have been taken within 24 hours of her death. And her doctor testifies that the poor woman was almost paralyzed a full week before she died, meaning it would have been impossible for her to have gotten up from her bed to get hold of and ingest the massive amount of arsenic found in her body. Armstrong's defense attorney also has to explain why Mr. Armstrong purchased such a huge amount of arsenic, and why, as the police reported, he divvied up the poison into small pouches, the kind that would be convenient to administer repeat doses. Armstrong's story is that he divided the arsenic into small amounts so that he could mix small quantities with water, which he would insert into a syringe to squirt onto the roots of each dandelion in his garden very precisely. But when he was arrested, he was carrying one of those pouches of arsenic in his pocket, and he was arrested in December, long past the growing season. Even more ominously, the tip of the syringe he said he used to kill dandelions fit the holes found in the bottoms of chocolates found in a box of chocolates that had been sent anonymously to Oswald Martin a few weeks before his tea with Armstrong. The chocolates had also been found to contain arsenic. The prosecution provided two motives Armstrong might have had for murdering his wife. The first was that Kitty Armstrong was known to be somewhat controlling and socially clueless. She had at least once publicly embarrassed her husband by interrupting his tennis game to tell him it was time to go home for a bath, and she didn't allow her husband to drink or smoke in public. Did Armstrong's resentment of this treatment build to the point of retaliation by murder? To support this argument, the prosecution chips away at the public image Armstrong has presented, that of being a faithful, devoted husband. Armstrong, the prosecution says, was seen at dances in his hometown, flirting with other women. He was known to have had affairs. When they arrested him, the police found love letters in his home, sent to him by a widow who's discovered to be his mistress. Dr. Hinks testifies that while Armstrong's wife had been institutionalized in an asylum, Armstrong was treated for a social disease acquired from a sex worker he visited during Mrs. Armstrong's absence. Of course, a lot of men can be unfaithful without going on to murder their wives. But there is a second motive the prosecution brings to light for Kitty Armstrong's murder. Armstrong's law practice had not been going well for some time. It was in financial distress. And Kitty was a woman who brought an independent income of £2,000 a year into the marriage, equivalent to around $120,000 in purchasing power today. In 1917, Kitty had drawn up a will, leaving most of her estate to her three children, with a portion of it going to her maid. Herbert Armstrong had been cut out. After her death, Armstrong presented a new will which gave him control of her estate. He had drawn up the will and claimed Kitty had signed it. However, later examinations concluded that Kitty's signature was probably forged. So let's stop here. Given these facts, if you were on the jury, would you find Armstrong innocent or guilty? You might be surprised to know that judicial experts then and today say that notwithstanding the very strong appearance of guilt, based on the facts provided, Armstrong should not have been convicted. Why? Because all of the evidence against him was circumstantial. Yes, an esteemed forensic scientist testified that the amount of arsenic in her system had to have been ingested 24 to 48 hours prior to her death. But it is possible that the forensic expert misjudged how long arsenic stays in the body. Kitty might theoretically have taken a large dose of the substance in the day or two before she became totally paralyzed. The forensic expert's declaration was his strong opinion, but it was not based on empirically acquired data. If we believe that Mrs. Armstrong didn't attempt suicide, the fact remains that it is possible someone else entered her room and administered the poison to her. No proof was made that it was Armstrong and only Armstrong who did it. And the alleged attempt to poison Oswald Martin also had not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. It's ironic that, from a letter of the law perspective, the only lawyer ever to be hanged in the UK may have been hanged due to legal misfeasance, the law being improperly interpreted in his case. It can be argued that his conviction was fully justified in terms of the spirit of the law, But unsettling as it may be, the fact is that a strong argument can't be made that it did not strictly abide by the letter of the law. Herbert Armstrong's execution takes place on Wednesday, May 31st, 1922. Over time, some added facts have come out that might help you make up your mind about Armstrong's guilt or innocence. After his conviction, people remembered how Armstrong had started his practice in the town of Hay as a partner of an attorney named Thomas Cheese, and how not too long after Armstrong went into business with him, Thomas Cheese and his wife passed away within 24 hours of each other, conveniently leaving Armstrong free to work as a solo attorney with a ready-made practice, as well as to take over the ownership of the law firm building that the couple had owned. People also remembered how an estate agent, or realtor as we call them in America, Will James David, had a lunch meeting with Armstrong to discuss recovering money Armstrong owed him. The realtor died the day following the lunch. And then there was a tax inspector who, 10 months after Kitty's death, informed Armstrong he owed back taxes. The tax inspector joined Armstrong for dinner. Armstrong gave him a cigarette for his return journey. He smoked the cigarette as he drove home, and it made him seriously ill. The next day, the tax inspector happened to meet his doctor, who noticed how unwell he looked and who told him that his breath smelled of arsenic. Some postscripts to this story. Oswald Martin never fully regained his health after the alleged attempt on his life by Armstrong. He died within 2 years of Armstrong's execution. In 1957, Dr. Bernard Spilsbury, in declining health and grieving the loss of a son during World War II, committed suicide. In 1933, the UK passed the Pharmacy and Poisons Act, a crucial legislation to modernize poison control. It restricted the sales of highly toxic substances to registered professionals. Gloucester Prison, where Herbert Armstrong was executed and buried, was closed on March 31, 2013, and is now a historic site used for guided tours, special events, and as a filming location. Plans for building new housing on the site are in development, but archaeological investigations are required before any plans can be approved, or the more than 100 bodies of executed criminals buried in unmarked graves on the grounds can be removed. On a happier note, Hay has become famous as a book town. The town is a book browser's delight with scores of bookstores, including those that specialize in rare books and children's books, and it's home to the Richard Booth Bookshop, the largest secondhand bookshop in the world. I hope you do one thing for me if you enjoyed this video. Hit that subscribe button. It will get you more content like this for free, and it will help me to continue to grow as an independent content creator. Thank you.